I went camping alone because I wanted to feel quiet inside my head. My life in the city felt loud and crowded, and I thought that a few days in the woods would calm me down. I chose a place that was far from any main road, deep inside a forest area where I had never gone before. I looked at the map many times and thought I understood the trails clearly, but even when I left home, I already felt a small worry inside my chest that I tried to ignore. I packed my tent, food, water, a small stove, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, a knife, and a few other things I thought were enough. I told myself that I knew what I was doing and that nothing bad would happen if I stayed careful. When I reached the area where I parked my car, the sky was pale and wide. The air felt clean and cool. I walked for hours along a narrow trail covered with dry leaves and small rocks. The sound under my boots was steady and slow, and I felt like I was walking further away from every part of my normal life. The forest around me was thick with tall trees that seemed older than anything I could understand. The deeper I went, the more the world behind me disappeared. There were no houses, no people, no sound of engines, nothing familiar. Only the wind moved through the trees, and every time it passed, the branches rubbed together and made a soft, rough sound that felt strange in my ears. When I found a flat area between a group of trees, I thought it was a perfect place to set up my tent. The ground was dry, the trees blocked the wind, and there was a small stream about 50 steps away. I pitched my tent slowly and carefully. I laid out my sleeping bag and placed my backpack in the corner of the tent. The simple shape of the tent made me feel safe for a short moment, even though I knew it was only thin fabric between me and everything outside. I cooked a small meal and ate while sitting on the ground, staring at the trees and the sky that grew darker bit by bit. As evening came, the forest changed. The light faded, and the shapes of the trees blended together into darker shadows. The temperature dropped, and the air felt colder on my skin. The sounds of day animals stopped, and new sounds began. Small movements in the bushes, distant rustling, the low, quiet steps of something I could not see. I told myself that it was normal, that animals moved at night all the time, but the feeling in my chest grew heavier. I felt like the forest was not empty anymore. It felt like something watched from far away, even if I could not prove it. When it finally became night, I went inside my tent and shut the zipper. I lay in my sleeping bag and tried to calm my thoughts. The darkness outside felt thick. My flashlight rested near my hand, and I kept touching it again and again to make sure it was still there. The ground under me felt cold and hard. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I should open them again. I tried to sleep, but sleep did not come. After some time, I heard footsteps outside the tent. They were slow and heavy, pressing down on the leaves and soil. The weight in those steps did not sound like a small animal. It sounded bigger. I felt my heart beat hard and fast inside my chest. I did not move. I tried to control my breathing, but my chest shook from fear. The sound came closer to my tent and stopped. There was silence, and I felt as if the night itself was holding its breath with me. I could feel every small hair on my arms rise. Then I heard another step, even closer, and then a soft scraping sound near the side of my tent. I did not speak. I did not call out. I stayed completely still. I knew that making noise or moving too fast might make things worse. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. The sound slowly moved away, and then I heard nothing but the wind again. I stayed awake until morning without sleeping even for a second. My body felt tired and numb, and my mind felt heavy and slow. When the sun finally rose, I went outside and looked around the tent. The ground near one side was disturbed. The leaves were pushed aside, and there were marks in the dirt. The shape of the prints looked like those of a large animal, maybe a bear. My chest felt tight again. I realized how fragile I was out there, alone with nothing but thin fabric to protect me. I thought about packing everything and leaving immediately, but I told myself I could handle one more day. I did not want to feel like I failed or gave up too fast. I spent the day gathering water from the stream, cleaning my cooking pot, and walking around the area near my camp. I noticed broken branches and old marks on the ground that showed other animals had passed through the area many times before. The forest looked calm in daylight, But underneath that calm, there was something hard and real. Nature did not care that I was there. I was just another small body moving through it. As the day went on, clouds began to gather in the sky. The wind grew stronger, and the leaves on the trees shook with a louder, dry sound. By evening, I felt uneasy again. I cooked food, but I barely tasted it. I kept looking around again and again, checking the shadows. The light faded much faster than before. The clouds covered the last bit of sun, and the forest became dim and cold. I put everything inside my tent and tried to prepare myself for another long night. The fear from the previous night was still inside me, but now it felt deeper, heavier, more real. When darkness fully settled, the wind became loud. The trees groaned and bent, and fallen leaves flew across the ground. The sound was constant, rough, and restless. I lay inside my tent, listening, trying to understand every noise. My thoughts became sharp and fearful. I could not relax. The storm grew stronger, and small drops of rain began to hit the surface of the tent like tiny fingers tapping again and again. Then I heard the same slow footsteps again. They were heavier this time. They did not pass at a distance. They came straight toward my tent. The ground shook slightly with each step. The rain became stronger, and the wind howled through the trees, but I could still hear the steps clearly under everything else. My throat felt dry, and my hands trembled. The steps stopped right beside my tent again. Something brushed against the fabric, and the thin wall of the tent bent inward for a moment like a soft breath pushing against it from the outside. I could smell a faint, damp, dirty scent. It smelled like wet fur and mud and earth. I understood without seeing that it was a large wild animal, most likely a bear moving through the area again because it remembered food or scent from my camp. I knew that I had made a mistake by staying. I knew that being alone there meant I had no help if anything went wrong. My fear rose until it felt like a heavy weight pressing on my chest from the inside. The animal moved around the tent slowly. I heard its body scrape against the ground and the fabric. At one point, it paused near the part of the tent where my backpack rested. I heard the sound of it sniffing, breathing, pressing its weight around. The rain grew harder, and thunder rolled across the sky, deep and distant but powerful. The tent shook in the wind, and every movement felt like it might tear at any second. I remained completely still. I did not make a sound. I focused only on breathing quietly and slowly. I knew that panic could destroy everything. After a long time that felt endless, the sound began to fade. The steps moved away from my tent and into the darkness. The storm continued, but the danger near me seemed to pass, at least for that moment. Still, I could not rest. I stayed awake again, all night, listening for every sound until the first weak light of morning touched the sky. When morning came, I walked outside again, and my fear became stronger when I saw how close the animal had been. Prints surrounded my camp area. Some were only inches from the tent wall. The ground was torn and pressed down by heavy weight. The cold air entered my lungs and felt sharp. At that moment, I finally understood that staying any longer would be stupid and dangerous. I began packing my things with shaking hands, trying to move as fast as I could. But as I folded my tent, I realized something even worse. My map was gone. I searched every part of my backpack, the ground, my pockets, the inside of the tent. It was nowhere. It must have fallen out the previous day when I walked, and I had not noticed. Now I stood in the middle of the forest, far from the main trail, with only a faint memory of which direction I came from. The sky was still cloudy, and the sun barely showed its position. The wind made the trees sway and creak, and the forest felt larger and more threatening than before. I decided to head in the direction I believed was right. I walked for hours through the woods, but the path did not look familiar. The ground sloped in ways I did not remember, and the trees all looked the same. My legs felt tired, and the straps of my backpack dug into my shoulders. The sound of the wind filled my ears, and sometimes I heard distant cracks of branches, as if something large moved somewhere behind me, unseen through the trees. As time passed, I realized I might be lost. Fear changed inside me. It was no longer only fear of the animal. It became fear of being stuck in the forest without direction, with limited food and water, getting weaker with every hour. I tried to stay calm. I kept walking, stopping sometimes to check the ground and the sky. I tried to remember small details from when I first arrived, but my memory felt blurred and unreliable. Near afternoon, the sky darkened again, and the air smelled like rain. I found a small clearing and decided to stop for a while to rest and think. I dropped my backpack to the ground and sat beside a fallen log. My legs ached, and my throat felt dry. I drank a small amount of water, trying not to waste any. My mind kept replaying the moment when I heard the steps outside the tent. The feeling of being powerless, trapped in thin fabric with something massive standing on the other side, stayed inside me like a heavy stone. Soon, I noticed something that made my fear return sharply. On the ground near the clearing, the same large animal tracks continued in the direction I had just walked from. The prints looked fresh and deep. It meant that the animal was not far behind me, moving through the same area, maybe even following old scents from my camp or my trail. The thought of being lost in the forest with a large wild animal somewhere nearby made the world feel smaller and more dangerous. I forced myself to keep moving. I walked faster, pushing through bushes and stepping over fallen branches. Time passed, but nothing looked familiar. The day slowly faded again toward evening, and the light thinned between the trees. The air became cold, and the shadows grew long. I knew I could not keep walking forever, but the idea of stopping made me nervous. Still, I had no choice. I needed rest. I found another spot to set up my tent, though this time every movement felt tense and rushed. Night arrived again, and fear returned with it. I lay inside my tent, tired but unable to sleep. My body felt heavy, but my mind was alert, watching for every sound. The forest around me felt alive with movement. I heard the wind, the branches, the faint scraping of small animals, and then, after a long, tense silence, I heard the sound I feared most. Heavy steps again. They came from the trees at a slow and steady pace, breaking through sticks and pushing down wet soil. They moved toward me. The sound was unmistakable. My stomach twisted, and a cold feeling spread through my body. I felt trapped again in the same thin fabric, lost in the forest, tired, weak, and now with the threat returning. The steps stopped a few meters away. I lay completely still. The night air outside was sharp and damp, and I smelled that same faint odor of wet fur and soil again. The animal stood there for a long time, listening, breathing, maybe trying to understand what I was. The silence between every sound felt painful. I tried to stay calm, but fear moved through my nerves like electricity, making my muscles tense and tight. Then I heard the animal move again, but this time it did not walk away. Came closer. The sound of its weight pressing into the ground grew stronger, and I felt the tent shift slightly when its body brushed by the side. I knew then that staying another night in this situation would not only be foolish, it would be deadly. I remained still again until, after what felt like endless time, the animal slowly moved away and disappeared into the dark once more. I did not sleep at all that night. I waited for the first sign of daylight, and when it finally came, weak and gray, I packed everything as fast as I could. I did not care about anything except leaving that forest. I chose a direction and began walking, telling myself that I would not stop until I found some sign of a real trail or human presence. Hours passed. My legs hurt, my shoulders burned, and my head felt heavy. My water was running low, and my food was almost gone. The sky stayed pale and cold, and the wind cut across my skin. I walked and walked, and just when I started to think that I might never find my way out, I saw something in the distance that changed everything. A thin, narrow dirt track. It was faint and partly covered by leaves, but it was man-made. My chest filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I followed the track for a long time, and eventually it grew wider and clearer. The trees slowly opened up, and the air felt different, less closed in. Not long after, I reached the edge of the forest and saw the open land beyond it. When I finally stepped out of the trees, my body felt weak and shaky, but my mind was clear. I understood what the past days had taught me. I understood how small I was in nature, how fast safety could disappear, and how thin the line was between calm and danger. I realized that my confidence had been careless. I had gone deep into the forest alone, unprepared for how real fear could become when there is no one else around. No solid walls, no help nearby, only dark trees, cold ground, heavy silence, and the sound of footsteps that do not belong to you. The ending of that experience stayed inside me long after I reached safety. I did leave the forest, and I survived, but the fear did not vanish when I walked away. It stayed in my memory in sharp detail. I remembered the cold nights, the heavy steps, the feeling of lying still while something large stood only inches away. I remembered how every mistake, every missing item, every wrong turn grew into something bigger and more dangerous in a place where nothing protected me except my own choices. In the end, I understood that the forest had shown me something true about myself and the world. I was not strong just because I believed I was. I was not safe just because I wanted to be. I was only a small living body in a place that did not care whether I stayed alive or disappeared into silence. I walked away from that trip with a new kind of respect for nature, for danger, and for fear itself. I knew clearly that I would never look at camping the same way again, and I knew exactly why. I went camping alone in a remote valley at the edge of a large forest that sat between a line of hills and a dry riverbed. I chose that place because I wanted silence and space, and I wanted to feel far away from roads and people and noise. I thought I was ready for it because I had camped before in different places, but this trip turned into something that stayed in my mind longer than anything else in my life. I remember every small thing about it because of how real and intense everything felt. I still remember the smell of the dust, the cold air at night, the dry grass brushing against my legs, and the strange feeling in my chest that grew slowly over time until it felt like it was pressing on me from the inside. I arrived in the late afternoon, when the sun was still high but not hot anymore. The sky was pale and wide, and the light stretched across the open land until it faded into shadows behind the hills. The ground was uneven and full of dry plants, small stones, and patches of hard dirt. I walked around to find a place where the ground was flat enough for my tent. I kept looking at the hills in the distance and at the tree line that marked the start of the dense forest. The trees looked dark from far away, like a thick wall that swallowed the light. I set my tent near a cluster of small bushes, with my back to the hills and the front of the tent facing the open field and the forest far ahead. I thought it was a good spot because there was enough open space to see around me. I placed my backpack beside the tent, unpacked my sleeping bag, my food, my water, and my small camping stove. I moved slowly and carefully, not in a rush because I liked the process of setting everything up. It made me feel calm and in control, like I was building a small home for the night in the middle of nowhere. As I worked, I noticed how quiet the place was. There were no cars, no voices, no distant city noise. There was only the soft sound of wind moving through the dry grass and the occasional faint sound of a bird somewhere far away. The air felt clean and light. I felt calm but also aware of how alone I was. It was the kind of silence that made every small sound feel bigger than it actually was. I walked a little around the area to look for firewood. Even though I did not plan to make a large fire, only a small one for warmth. I picked up broken branches, dry sticks, and small pieces of wood scattered near the bushes. While I walked, I kept looking back at my tent to be sure I still knew where it was. The ground stretched so far that it made me feel small. The hills behind me looked closer when I faced them, but when I turned away, they felt far and heavy, like they were watching from a distance. After I collected enough wood, I returned to my tent and placed everything in a small pile beside the stove. I sat for a while on the ground, my hands resting on my knees, and I looked at the forest across the open land. The tree line looked darker now as the light began to soften. The shadows grew longer and stretched across the ground in long shapes that slowly melted into each other. I ate a simple meal and drank water. I moved slowly and kept noticing every detail around me. The air grew cooler, and the wind became softer but colder. I could feel it on my face and on my hands. I could also feel something else I could not name at first, like a thin tension that had not been there earlier. It was not fear yet. It was more like awareness, like my body understood where I was before my mind did. As the sun went down, the color of the sky changed into deeper shades of orange and then into darker blue. The first stars began to show above me. I watched them appear one by one. The ground around me faded into darkness, and the shape of the forest turned into a long black mass. The hills behind me blended into the sky until I could no longer see their edges clearly. The silence grew thicker with the night. Small sounds started to appear, sounds that only happen when it becomes dark. The sound of insects moving in the grass, the faint rustling of something small far away, the distant creaking sound of wood somewhere in the forest. Every sound felt close, even if it was far. My ears felt sharper. My breathing felt louder. I sat outside the tent for a while, just listening. I tried to stay calm and steady. I reminded myself that nature always sounds different at night, and most of the noises come from small animals moving around. I tried to think in a simple way, not letting my mind create stories or fears. After some time, I went inside my tent and zipped it closed. The darkness inside felt heavier than outside because the thin walls of the tent trapped my breathing and the small space around me. I lay inside my sleeping bag and listened again. The ground under me felt firm but uneven. The smell of dust mixed with the faint smell of nylon from the tent fabric. First, everything was normal. I heard the wind, the insects, and the soft rustling of plants. Then, as more time passed, I noticed something different. There were steps. Very slow, very faint, somewhere in the open field. They were not loud or heavy, but they were steady. They came from far away at first, so light that I thought maybe I imagined them. But the sound kept repeating with the same slow rhythm. The steps sounded like something moving through dry grass, pressing it down and letting it rise again. I lay still and did not move. I kept my breathing slow. My heart beat harder in my chest. I did not want to make any sound. I wanted to listen clearly. The steps grew a little closer, but they were still distant enough that I could not tell where exactly they were. They stopped for a moment, and the silence returned. That short silence felt heavier than the sound itself. Then the steps started again, but this time from a slightly different direction, like whatever was out there had changed its path. The pace was slow, unhurried, careful. It did not sound like a running animal. It did not sound like random movement. It sounded like something moving with purpose, step by step, stopping sometimes, then continuing again. I imagined all the possible explanations. Maybe it was a deer, maybe a wild dog, maybe some other animal that moved slowly while looking for food. I told myself this again and again in my mind, using simple logic to calm myself, but the feeling in my chest kept growing heavier. It was the feeling of not being sure, of not being able to see, of hearing something that I could not fully understand. More time passed, and the steps faded away into the distance. I waited in silence, still not moving. I stayed there, awake, for what felt like a long time. The night grew colder. My hands felt cold inside the sleeping bag, and I could feel the cold air against my lips as I breathed out. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but I did not know when. The next time I opened my eyes, it was still night, and everything was dark. I woke up because I heard something again, but this time it was closer. I did not move my body. I only opened my eyes and listened. The sound was not steps at first. It was the faint sound of something brushing against the outside of my tent, like a slow drag of fabric or grass touching the surface. My heart began to beat harder and faster. I could feel it in my throat. I kept breathing slow because I did not want to make noise. I listened again and heard a small sound near the corner of the tent, like something pressing lightly on the ground next to me. The sound was not strong, but it was close enough that I could almost feel it through the ground. I remembered that I had food stored inside my backpack outside the tent, near the bushes. I thought maybe an animal smelled it and came near my camp. That made sense, and I tried to hold onto that explanation. Still, the closeness of the sound made my body feel tense and stiff, like every muscle was ready to react. The sound stopped for a while, then started again, but this time I heard slow steps moving around the tent. The steps were light but controlled, and they circled part of the area near me. The grass moved under the footsteps. The sound would come from one side, then pause, then appear softly from another side. I stared into the darkness of the tent, not able to see outside, only able to imagine. I felt trapped inside my own small space, separated from whatever was out there by only a thin layer of fabric. I could not see anything, but the sound made everything feel too real. Time passed in long stretches. I did not know if it was minutes or hours. Eventually, the sounds went farther away. The night became quieter again. I stayed awake for a long time, and even when I felt sleepy, I still kept listening. My mind would drift, then snap back when I heard a tiny sound. When morning finally came, the light slowly entered through the thin tent walls. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp, and the early light spread across the land in pale colors. The ground looked calm and empty, but I noticed marks in the dirt near the bushes and around my tent. The marks looked like footprints, not animal prints, but long and uneven, like worn shoes pressing into soft dirt in some places and faint in others. I bent down and looked closer at them. The ground was hard, so the prints were not clear, but I could see shapes that looked too long and narrow to belong to most animals. I felt a heavy feeling in my chest again. The prints did not look fresh, but they were not old either. They looked like they were made during the night. I walked slowly around the area, following some of the faint marks, but they disappeared into harder ground and dry grass. I could not tell where they led. I looked toward the hills, then toward the forest, and I felt the weight of the empty space around me. The land looked calm and harmless in the daylight, but the memory of the night sounds made everything feel different. I tried to stay logical. I told myself maybe someone had passed through earlier, maybe before I arrived, maybe a shepherd or a local person moving through the land. But the prints near my tent looked too close, too recent, too specific to ignore. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I walked small distances, explored the dry riverbed, collected more wood, and made sure everything in my camp was organized. I stayed alert, always looking around, always listening, even when nothing seemed wrong. The sun warmed the ground during the day, but the feeling in my chest never fully went away. By late afternoon, I began to think about whether I should leave or stay for another night. Part of me wanted to leave because of the strange feeling and the footprints. Another part of me did not want fear to control my decision. I told myself it was probably nothing serious and that I could stay one more night if I stayed careful and alert. As evening came again, the air cooled and the shadows grew long across the land. I prepared for the night early. I stored my food farther away from the tent, sealed inside plastic bags, and placed it inside a small pile of rocks to keep animals from reaching it easily. I checked my tent, my backpack, my flashlight, and everything else I had. The sky darkened again, and the silence returned, deeper than before. I sat outside the tent for a long time, staring at the dark outline of the forest and the hills behind me. I felt the same awareness, but this time it was stronger, like my body expected something to happen. When I finally went inside the tent, I lay down and listened. At first, there was nothing unusual. The same insects, the same wind, the same quiet movements in the grass. But as the night grew darker and the air colder, I heard the sound again. Slow steps in the distance, faint but steady, like the previous night. The same rhythm, the same pattern. I felt my chest tighten again. The steps came closer, slowly, stopping sometimes, then continuing, as if whoever or whatever was out there was moving carefully and watching the ground. I lay still, my body tense, my breathing slow and controlled. The steps moved closer to my camp, closer to the tent, then stopped again for a long time. The silence felt heavier than the sound. I could feel the darkness pressing against the thin tent walls. I could feel my heart beating inside my chest so hard that I thought maybe it could be heard outside. After a while, I heard the soft sound of grass being pressed near the tent again. The sound was slow, steady, intentional. I heard it circle the tent halfway, then stop near the front. The space around me felt smaller and tighter. I remembered the footprints from the morning. I remembered how they looked like worn shoes. I thought about the open land and how there was no sign of any other traveler, no sign of a campsite, no sign of anyone else living nearby. I realized that whatever came near my tent was not lost. It was choosing to be there. The sound stayed near the front of my tent for a long time. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I just lay there, waiting, listening, feeling every second stretch into something longer. Then, slowly, the sound faded again. The steps moved away into the distance, then disappeared completely into silence. I stayed awake the rest of the night, not sleeping at all, waiting for the sound to return, but it did not. When morning came, I stepped outside again. The cold air hit my face, and the light revealed more marks on the ground. New prints, more clear this time. They were close to the tent, closer than the day before. I followed them for a short distance, and I saw how they led away into the open land and faded near the dry riverbed. There were no signs of tools, no camp, no fire, no trail of equipment. Just those prints that appeared during the night and vanished into the open land like the person who made them did not want to be found. That was when I understood something important and simple at the same time. I was not alone out there. Someone else had been moving around my camp at night, watching or circling, staying quiet, staying patient, not coming close in the day, but approaching in the dark. I did not know who they were or what they wanted, and that uncertainty felt more real and more frightening than anything else. I packed my things slowly but with full focus. I took down my tent, folded it, stored everything inside my backpack, and made sure I did not leave anything behind. I kept looking around while I worked, scanning the open land, the hills, and the tree line. The place looked empty, but I no longer believed what my eyes showed me. When I was ready, I started walking back the way I came, across the open ground toward the path that led out of the valley. As I walked, I kept feeling like someone was watching from far away, hidden in the distance, unseen in daylight but still there, still aware of me. I did not stop or rest until I reached the dirt track that led back toward the road. Only then did I feel the weight inside my chest start to fade, but it never fully disappeared. Even after leaving, the memory stayed. The experience felt real in every detail. The silence, the cold, the slow steps, the footprints near my tent, the feeling of presence without sight. There were no ghosts, no strange creatures, no fantasy. There was only the unknown shape of another person in the dark, moving carefully through the night while I lay alone in a thin fabric shelter, trusting the open land to keep me safe. The ending of it is simple and clear. I left that place the next morning because I understood that staying there would not be brave or meaningful. It would only be careless. I did not need to wait for something worse to happen to believe what my senses had already told me. Someone else was there, and they had no reason to be that close in the dark unless their intentions were silent and hidden. I never saw the person. I never found out who they were, where they came from, or why they walked near my camp at night. But the truth of it remained clear. The forest, the hills, the valley, and the open land were not empty. I had entered a place where someone else moved quietly and watched without being seen. Leaving was not fear. Leaving was understanding. I went camping alone in the late summer because I wanted to prove something to myself. I felt like my life had become soft and slow, and I wanted to feel something real again. I picked a small lake deep inside a forest far from towns and houses. The place was quiet, wide, and empty, and I felt like I would have all the space in the world to think, to walk, and to stay away from noise. I packed my tent, my sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, a headlamp, a knife, and a map. I checked the weather and saw clear skies and calm wind. I told myself that nothing bad could happen if I stayed careful and followed the right steps. The road to the trailhead was long and rough. I drove for hours through dusty roads, narrow turns, and thick trees that leaned toward the path like tired arms. When I reached the small dirt area where hikers usually parked, there were no other cars. That made me feel strong at first. I liked the idea of being alone. I thought it meant peace, silence, and space to breathe. I stepped out of the car and the air smelled like dry earth and pine needles. There was no sound except wind passing through branches and the faint buzz of insects far away. I locked the car, put on my backpack, and started walking down the trail. The ground was uneven but firm. Roots twisted out of the dirt like ropes, and stones hid under layers of fallen leaves. The air felt warm at first, but the deeper I walked, the cooler it became. The trees grew taller and blocked more of the sky, and the sunlight turned into thin, broken strips across the ground. I kept my pace slow to save energy, and I noticed everything around me. The smell of moss, the way small ants walked in long lines across fallen branches, the way birds rustled high above but never came close. As I walked, I thought about how far away I was from everything. There was no signal on my phone, no sound of cars, no voices, no sign of another human being. I felt proud of myself for coming out this far. I imagined sitting by the lake later, watching the still water reflect the sky, and feeling calm for the first time in a long time. I walked for hours until my legs felt heavy and sweat rolled down my back. When I finally reached the lake, it looked almost unreal. The water was dark and still, surrounded by tall trees on all sides. The shore was made of dirt, stones, and patches of thin grass. The air felt colder near the water, and the wind was slower. I walked around the shore and found a small flat area beneath a group of tall pine trees. I thought it was the perfect spot. The ground was soft but stable. The lake stretched out in front of me, and the trees behind me formed a wall that made the place feel hidden. I took off my backpack and rested for a few minutes. Then I set up my tent, hammered the stakes into the dirt, rolled out my sleeping bag, and organized my things inside. Everything felt calm, quiet, and controlled. I boiled water, ate a simple meal, and watched the still lake as the sky slowly turned orange, then pink, then blue again. When night started to fall, the forest changed. The wind stopped almost completely. The insects became louder. The lake turned into a dark sheet with no reflections. I sat near the tent and felt the air grow heavier and colder. I watched the tree line across the water until it became nothing but a black wall. I felt small and distant from everything familiar, but I told myself that this was normal. It was nature. It was silence. It was the reason I came. I went inside my tent when the darkness became too thick to see through. I lay inside my sleeping bag and listened to the sounds outside. The insects, the faint movement of leaves, the tiny crackle of twigs falling somewhere in the distance. At first, these sounds felt natural. I tried to fall asleep and calm my breathing, but my mind kept thinking about how far away I was from help. There was no one nearby, no houses, no lights, only dark trees, silent water, and empty land. It was deep into the night when I first heard it. It was not a loud sound, but it was clear. Something moved through the brush not far from my tent. The noise was slow, steady, and careful. I froze inside my sleeping bag. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. I held my breath and waited, listening closely. The sound came again. A crunch of dry leaves, a light step, another step, a pause, then another step. It did not sound like wind, and it did not sound random. It sounded like something large and quiet trying to move without making noise. I did not move. I stared into the darkness of the tent and felt my chest grow tight. I thought about wild animals. Maybe a deer, maybe a bear, maybe something that came near the lake to drink. I slowly reached for my knife inside my bag, not to use it, but to hold it because I felt weak without it. I waited, expecting the sound to move away, but instead it grew closer. The steps circled the area slowly. The weight of each step pressed softly into the dirt. Stopped, stayed silent for several seconds, then continued again. I realized that whatever it was not simply passing through. It was exploring the space around my camp. It stayed close, then moved away, then came back again from a slightly different angle. My heart beat so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I tried not to breathe loudly. I tried not to make any noise at all. Minutes felt like hours as I lay still. The sound finally faded into the trees and disappeared, but even when it stopped, the fear stayed. I kept thinking about the steps, how slow they were, how they paused like something was thinking or observing. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, listening to every sound, waiting for the steps to come back. When the sun finally rose, the forest looked normal again. The lake was calm. The air was cool and pale. I crawled out of my tent and walked slowly around the camp. The ground near the edge of my sight showed faint impressions in the dirt. They were not sharp enough for me to recognize fully, but they were real, clear marks from something heavy that had moved around during the night. Some prints were close to the tent, closer than I felt comfortable knowing. I felt uneasy, but I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it was nothing dangerous. I told myself not to panic. I spent the morning walking near the shore, collecting small sticks for fire, and exploring the edge of the lake. But even as I moved around, I kept thinking about the sound from the night. The forest did not feel peaceful anymore. It felt watchful, quiet in a way that made me feel exposed. The space between the trees felt darker. The silence felt heavier than before. By afternoon, I thought about leaving early, but I argued against it in my head. I had come all this way. I had prepared for the trip. I told myself to stay calm and finish what I planned. I tried to relax, but my body stayed tense, like it was waiting for something to happen again. The air felt different as the day went on, like the forest held its breath. When evening came, the same fear returned even before darkness arrived. The light faded slowly and the lake turned black again. I ate but could barely taste my food. My hands shook. I cleaned up, stored my things, and went into the tent as the last bit of light disappeared. The night air felt colder than the night before. The silence felt deeper. I lay there again, listening. Hours passed. Then I heard it again. This time the steps were slower and closer than before. The sound came from the same side of the camp as the previous night, like the same path was being used. I felt cold sweat on my back. The steps stopped near the tent. I could hear breathing this time, not loud but steady, not animal-like in the way I expected, just breathing, calm, patient breathing. I did not move. I did not blink. I stared into the darkness and waited. The breathing stayed for a long time. Then the sound began to move again, circling around the tent just like before, slow and deliberate. I realized with a sharp, heavy fear that this was not an animal wandering or exploring. This movement felt controlled, curious, intentional. It walked, stopped, listened, then continued. I could feel the weight of presence outside my thin layer of fabric. The small walls of the tent felt useless, like they could not protect me from anything. At one point, the steps stopped directly behind my head. I could hear the faint shift of dirt beneath weight. It stayed still for so long that I felt my skin crawl. I imagined a shape standing there, inches away, silent and upright in the dark. I could not understand why it was there, why it came back, or what it wanted. I thought about running, but I knew that unzipping the tent and moving fast in darkness would make noise and expose me. So I stayed frozen. The sound eventually moved away again, slowly, fading back into the trees, leaving only silence and my shaking body behind. I did not sleep a single second that night. I just waited for morning, terrified and exhausted. When daylight came, I went outside again. The ground showed more faint marks around the tent. Long impressions, disturbed dirt, broken thin twigs near the tree line behind my camp. Something tall had stood there. Something had returned to the same area in the night to walk slow circles around my tent. I knew I had to leave. I packed everything as fast as I could, but even while I moved, I could feel the weight of the forest around me, like something was still nearby, watching from somewhere behind the trees. My hands shook as I folded the tent and stuffed it into my backpack. I felt exposed in the open daylight, like distance did not protect me anymore. I started hiking back toward the trailhead as soon as my pack was ready. The path through the forest felt different now. Every sound felt sharp. Every shadow looked deeper. I walked fast, but not fast enough to feel safe. The trail twisted and climbed through the trees. The deeper I moved, the more I felt like something followed at a distance. I never heard clear steps this time, but the feeling stayed with me, heavy and suffocating. Hours passed as I moved through the forest. I grew tired and thirsty, but I did not stop. I just kept walking, pushing my legs forward because stopping felt dangerous. The trees seemed endless. The light between them grew dim even though it was still daytime. The quiet pressed against my ears, thick and unnatural. At one point on the trail, I saw something that stopped me cold. On the side of the path, near a fallen tree, I saw marks on the ground where someone had knelt. The dirt was pressed down, and nearby, there were fresh footprints. They were not animal prints. They were human, large, plain, and recent. They pointed toward the path, then away again, disappearing into the dense trees in the same direction I had come from. I realized then, with sudden clarity, that what walked around my tent did not walk on 4 legs. It did not wander like an animal. It stood on 2 feet. It moved with purpose. It returned twice. It waited. It watched. Someone had been out there. Someone had come near my camp in the middle of the night, standing inches from me while I slept alone in the dark, and I had no idea who they were, what they wanted, or how long they had been moving through those woods. There were no houses nearby, no camps, no parked cars, no sign of anyone else, except those prints and the slow, patient steps that circled my tent. I kept walking with fear filling every part of me. I did not look behind me again. I just walked until my legs burned and my shoulders ached from the weight of my backpack. When I finally reached the trailhead and saw my car through the trees, I felt relief so strong it made my chest hurt. I unlocked the door, threw my backpack inside, and sat there for a moment with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The forest looked calm and harmless from where I sat, but I knew what I had felt out there. I knew what I had heard. I knew someone had been moving through that empty wilderness at night with slow, careful steps, standing close to my tent without saying a word, returning again and again for reasons I would never understand. I drove away and did not stop until I reached a town far away. Even then, the feeling did not fully leave me. The thought stayed in my mind, heavy and cold. Out there, in the dark forest near that quiet lake, someone was living or hiding or wandering without being seen. Someone who walked slowly in the night, who did not speak, who circled strangers in their sleep and then disappeared again before daylight. The ending for me was simple and clear. I never went camping alone again. I never trusted silence the same way. I learned that sometimes the scariest things are not wild animals or storms or accidents. Sometimes the most frightening thing is another person, hidden somewhere in a place where no one else is around, moving slowly in the dark while you lie there thinking you are alone. And I know that on those nights by the lake, I was not alone at all. I planned the camping trip because I wanted to clear my head and be alone for a few days. I picked a place that was far from town, near a wide stretch of forest and hills where few people went. I looked at maps for hours and saw a small lake at the end of a dirt road that turned into a narrow trail. The place looked quiet and empty. I liked that idea. I packed my tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, a knife, a first aid kit, extra clothes, and a headlamp. I told myself I would stay for 3 nights and take long walks during the day and rest by the water in the evening. I felt calm when I started the trip, but I did not know how different I would feel later. The road to the area was rough and full of loose stones and dust. I drove slowly and watched tall dry grass move with the wind on both sides. The sky was pale and wide, and the air felt dry. When I reached the small dirt clearing at the end of the road, I turned off the engine and listened to the silence. There were no other cars, no houses, and no signs of people. I felt a mix of peace and unease. I told myself it was normal to feel that way when you are alone in a place like that. I took my backpack and walked along the trail that went into the trees. The ground was covered with leaves, small sticks, and patches of loose soil. I could hear my own steps, the soft crunch under my boots, and the faint sound of insects in the distance. After about 20 minutes of walking, I reached the lake. The water was still and dark, and tall trees stood around it like walls. The ground near the shore was flat enough to set up a tent. I chose a spot a little farther back from the water, where the ground was dry and firm. I dropped my bag and took a deep breath. The air smelled like wet soil and pine. I could feel the quiet pressing around me. It was the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound loud. I set up my tent slowly, making sure every strap and pole was tight. I rolled out my sleeping bag inside and placed my gear neatly. I liked things to be organized, especially when I was alone. I walked around the area to get a sense of the space. I noticed that the trees on one side of the lake grew thicker and darker, and the ground sloped upward into the hills. On the other side, the land opened into bushes and tall grass. I saw animal tracks in the dirt near the water. Some looked like deer, some smaller, maybe raccoons or something like that. I did not see fresh footprints from people. That made me feel more alone than before, and I was not sure if that feeling was good or bad. I cooked a simple meal and watched the sky change color as the sun dropped behind the hills. The air cooled fast and the shadows stretched across the ground. I sat near the water and listened to the faint movement of insects and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I felt like time slowed down. When it got dark, I went into my tent and lay on my back, staring at the thin fabric above me. The only light I had was the weak glow of my headlamp when I turned it on for a moment. When I turned it off, the darkness felt thick and close. I could feel my heartbeat, slow and steady at first. Later in the night, I woke up without knowing why. The air inside the tent felt cold, and my face felt numb. I lay still and listened. At first, I heard nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the faint movement of branches in the wind. Then I heard something else. It was a faint sound of steps in the leaves, slow and careful, like something or someone was moving near my tent. The steps were not fast, and they did not sound like an animal running. They sounded like weight shifting over dry leaves, one step, then a pause, then another step. I felt my body tighten and my chest grow heavy. I did not move. I did not breathe deeply. I tried to control every sound my body could make. The sound moved in a small arc around my tent. Not very close, but not far either. I could feel fear build in my chest, thick and heavy, like it was filling the space around my ribs. I wanted to look outside, but I also did not want to. I did not know what I would see, and the thought of seeing something unexpected scared me more than not seeing it. After a while, the sound faded and the night became quiet again. I stayed awake for a long time, staring into the darkness, trying to steady my mind, telling myself it was probably an animal looking for food near the water. When morning came, the light felt weak and gray. I crawled out of the tent and looked around the area. The air was cold and the ground was wet with dew. I walked slowly in a circle around my camp, scanning the dirt and leaves. I saw faint marks that looked like footprints, but they were smudged and hard to read. They did not look like clear animal tracks. They looked more like something heavy had pressed down the leaves and soil. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it, but the uneasy feeling stayed in my stomach. I decided to go for a long walk to distract myself and explore the hills. I packed some snacks, water, and my knife, and I followed a faint path that went into the thicker trees. The ground felt uneven and soft in some places, and I had to watch each step. The deeper I walked into the forest, the darker the air felt under the trees. Even though it was daytime, I could smell damp soil and old wood. I watched birds move through the branches high above me, and sometimes I heard the sudden noise of something small running through the bushes. After walking for about an hour, I saw something strange ahead of me. In a small clearing between the trees, there was an old fire pit made of stones. Around it, there were pieces of trash half buried in the dirt, like old food wrappers, a broken metal can, and what looked like part of a torn backpack strap. The fire pit looked like it had been used before, but not very recently. The ground around it was pressed down, like someone had camped there many times. I felt a strange tension in my chest. The place did not look like an official campsite. It looked secret, hidden, and careless. I walked around slowly and looked closer at the ground. I saw deep footprints that looked like they came from heavy boots. Some looked new, some older. I saw the remains of a rope tied around a tree trunk, worn and frayed. The bark was scraped as if heavy things had been tied or dragged there. I did not like the feeling of that place. It felt wrong. It felt like something had happened there that I did not want to understand. I decided to leave and return to my camp, but as I turned away from the clearing, I noticed something else. There was a narrow path behind the trees, not natural, but made by repeated steps. It went deeper into the woods. I told myself I should not follow it, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I walked slowly along the path. The ground felt uneven and full of small holes and exposed roots. The trees grew closer together, and their branches stretched over the path like arms. After a few minutes of walking, I saw another small area, hidden from the main path. There were wooden boards stacked against a tree, a dirty blanket rolled up near the base of another tree, and a rusted metal container lying on its side. There were also marks on the ground, like something heavy had been dragged across it again and again. I felt a chill move through my whole body. The place did not look like a normal campsite. It looked like someone had been living there in secret, away from everyone else. Maybe a hunter, maybe someone hiding, maybe someone doing something illegal. I did not want to stay there for another second. I turned and walked back the way I came, faster this time, my heart beating harder with every step. The air felt tight around me. I kept thinking about the steps I heard the night before and the footprints near my tent. On my way back toward the lake, I had the feeling that I was not alone on the trail. I could not hear clear footsteps behind me, but sometimes I thought I heard faint movement in the distance, like branches brushing or leaves shifting. I did not want to stop and turn around, because I was afraid of what I might see. I kept walking, my back tense, my shoulders tight, my hands gripping the straps of my backpack. When I finally reached the open area near the lake, I felt only a small relief, because the unease stayed with me. I sat near my tent and tried to calm myself. I ate a little food and drank water, but the taste felt dull. I kept thinking about the hidden camp in the woods, the rope marks on the tree, the old trash, and the deep boot marks. I wondered how long someone had been staying there and if they still came back at times. I thought about the sound from the night before and wondered if the same person had walked near my tent. The idea made my skin feel tight and cold. The rest of the day passed slowly. I walked along the edge of the lake and watched the water move in small ripples when the wind blew. I tried to focus on simple things like the color of the sky and the smell of the air, but my mind kept going back to that hidden clearing. As the sun went down again, the trees grew dark and sharp like shadows. I prepared my gear and checked everything twice. I made sure my knife was by my side and my headlamp had enough battery. I felt exposed in that open space near the water. When night came again, the darkness felt heavier than the night before. I lay in my tent and listened carefully to every sound. At first it was quiet, just the soft whisper of the wind and the faint movement of branches. After some time, I heard something again. It was the same slow, careful steps on the leaves. This time they sounded closer and more deliberate. I could feel my heart beating fast and hard in my chest, and my hands felt cold even inside my sleeping bag. The steps moved toward the side of my tent and then stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the sound itself. It was like something was standing still and listening. I tried not to move. I tried to breathe in slow, shallow breaths so I would not make a sound. I could feel the thin wall of the tent between me and whatever was outside. I thought about the hidden camp and the rope marks on the tree and the heavy footprints. I imagined someone standing there in the dark, watching my tent, thinking about what was inside. My mind filled with fear, heavy and thick, like it was taking up all the space in my body. I waited for a sound, any sound, but the silence stayed for a long time. Then I heard a faint scrape on the ground, like a boot shifting its weight. The sound moved slowly along the side of my tent, then stopped again. I felt trapped. I knew that if I made a sound or moved too fast, I might draw more attention. At the same time, I knew I could not stay like that forever. After a long time, the sound faded again into the night, just like the night before. But this time, the fear did not fade with it. It stayed inside me, pulsing and heavy. When morning came, I felt exhausted and weak. My head felt heavy and my body felt stiff. I walked outside and looked around the area again. The ground near the side of my tent had clearer marks this time. They looked like deep prints from boots, pressed into the soft soil. The prints led away toward the trees and disappeared into the tall grass. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew I was not imagining it. Someone had been there in the night. I thought about leaving right away, but I also felt afraid of the walk back to my car. The trail went through the trees, and I knew that if someone was watching me, They could easily follow or get ahead of me. I tried to think clearly. I packed some of my gear and tightened the straps. I decided I would leave before evening and not stay another night there. I spent the next hours packing my things slowly and carefully, checking the area again and again, trying to see if anything changed, if anything new appeared. As I moved around, I noticed something else near the edge of the trees. There was a small piece of torn fabric stuck on a branch, like it had been ripped from clothing. It looked dark and worn. The sight of it made my body tense again. It showed that someone had passed very close to my camp. I picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then dropped it again. I did not want to keep anything that belonged to whoever was out there. When the sun was still high in the sky, I strapped my backpack on and began walking back toward the trail that led to the dirt road. Every step felt slow and heavy. I kept looking ahead, then back over my shoulder, then to the sides. The trees looked different now. They did not feel peaceful. They felt like tall, silent shapes that could hide anything. The air felt dry in my throat and my breathing sounded loud in my ears. As I walked deeper into the trees, I heard faint sounds again, not close, but not far. It sounded like someone was moving through the forest, not directly behind me but somewhere to the side, keeping a slow pace that matched mine. I did not want to run and make noise, but I also did not want to walk too slowly. I tried to keep a steady pace, my feet pressing into the ground, my hands tight on my straps. My thoughts were sharp and afraid. I kept imagining someone stepping out from behind a tree, blocking the path, and I felt fear rise higher in my chest with every step. The deeper part of the trail felt darker, even though it was still daytime. The trees blocked a lot of the light, and the air felt colder. I saw broken branches on the ground and places where the soil looked disturbed, like someone had walked there many times. I knew I had to keep moving. I told myself that the road was not too far, that I only needed to reach my car and leave. After a while, I came to a bend in the trail where the trees grew very close together and the ground sloped downward. As I walked through that part, I heard a sudden sound to my right, like something heavy shifting in the bushes. My heart jumped in my chest. I did not stop, but I slowed for a second and turned my head just enough to see movement between the branches. I could not see a face, only a dark shape, still and low, as if someone was crouching there. I felt a sharp wave of fear move through my whole body. I did not wait to see more. I kept walking, faster now, my steps louder, my breathing rough and shallow. I could feel that whatever or whoever was there knew I was aware of them. The air felt tense, like the space around me was closing in. I kept thinking about the hidden camp, the rope marks, the old trash, the deep footprints, and the marks near my tent. I knew that staying any longer was dangerous. I knew that the person who had been there was not just passing by. They had been close to me at night, watching, moving around my camp while I slept. Every sound around me felt louder now. The rustle of leaves, the distant crack of a branch, the faint shift of weight on the soil. I kept moving and finally, after what felt like a long, endless stretch of walking, I saw a faint opening in the trees ahead. The trail widened slightly, and the light grew brighter. I recognized the area near the end of the path where it met the dirt road. My legs felt weak with relief and fear at the same time. When I stepped out of the trees and onto the open dirt, the silence felt different. It felt wider, like the forest had let me go. I walked quickly toward my car, my eyes scanning every side of the clearing, making sure nothing moved. I opened the door with shaking hands and threw my backpack inside. I started the engine and felt the vibration under my hands like a lifeline. As I drove away, I looked in the mirror and watched the narrow trail disappear behind the trees. The drive back felt long and heavy. My mind replayed everything I had seen and heard. The footsteps at night, the smudged prints near my tent, the hidden clearing with old trash and rope marks, the torn fabric on the branch, the crouched shape in the bushes near the trail. None of it felt like simple coincidence. It felt like I had camped in a place that someone else used for reasons I did not want to know. It felt like I had been watched, studied, maybe judged as a threat or as prey, or simply as an intruder in the wrong place. When I reached town, I did not feel the same as I did before the trip. I felt older in a way, more aware of how quiet places can hide things you never see until you are too close to them. I thought about how easily something could have gone wrong, how easily I could have disappeared in that forest without anyone knowing where I went. I understood how thin the line is between calm solitude and real danger. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about the lake, the trees, and the hidden camp. I felt grateful that I left when I did, that I trusted the fear I felt instead of ignoring it. I also felt a deep respect for the silence of wild places, because I learned that silence does not always mean safety. Sometimes it means something else is there, quiet, patient, and close. The ending of my trip was not the ending I expected when I first planned it. I went there to be alone and to find peace, but instead I found a place where someone else had claimed that silence in a darker way. The clear ending for me was the moment I drove away and understood that I would never return to that area again. I knew that the forest there was not empty, and that the danger in that place was not from ghosts or strange creatures, but from real people and real actions that live in the shadows of quiet land. I ended the trip with a clear lesson in my mind. The world can feel peaceful on the surface, but there are hidden places where things happen that you do not see, and sometimes you step too close to them without knowing. I survived because I listened to the fear, because I left before curiosity or pride could hold me there longer. That was the end of that story in my life, and I was thankful that the ending was me driving away, alive, with the memory of that place instead of becoming a part of it forever. I had been planning the trip for weeks. I wanted to get away from everything: work, city noise, the constant pull of phones and notifications. I needed silence, solitude, and something raw and real, even if it made me uncomfortable. The place I chose was a remote forest in the northern part of the state, a stretch of woods that few people visited because it was thick, dense, and unmarked on most maps. The road ended with a narrow, unpaved trail, rough and uneven, snaking between tall pine trees and steep slopes. I drove slowly, feeling the tires crunch against gravel and rocks, and I could already sense how far from normal life I was heading. My backpack was loaded with essentials: a sturdy tent, sleeping bag, extra food, a small stove, water, first aid supplies, and a headlamp. I had maps, a compass, and enough gear to survive if I had to spend a week in the woods, though I had only planned for 3 nights. The first day was mostly uneventful. I found a small clearing near a creek where the water ran clean and cold. The soil was firm and dry, perfect for pitching my tent. I spent the first hours setting it up, making sure it was secure, checking the lines and stakes. I stacked firewood nearby, choosing pieces that were dry and manageable. Then I explored a little around the area, noticing how the light changed as the afternoon moved toward evening. The forest felt alive, not in a mystical way, but as a machine of life, complex and buzzing. Birds called to each other, leaves whispered in the wind, and somewhere distant, a branch snapped, probably under the weight of a deer or a raccoon. It was calming at first. I had expected the forest to feel oppressive, but in the daylight, it was just vast and green, with shadows stretching as the sun dipped. I cooked a simple meal over the fire: a can of beans, some dehydrated vegetables, a little instant rice, and watched the smoke curl into the sky. By the time the sun set, the forest had grown dark, a complete darkness that I wasn't used to. The headlamp was necessary even to walk a few feet, and the fire was comforting. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the nighttime forest. Owls called intermittently, something large rustled the underbrush, and the creek babbled faintly nearby. I felt a strange mixture of relaxation and alertness. The first night was quiet, nothing significant, just the usual sounds of a forest settling into night. The second day, I decided to go farther into the woods. I wanted to see a ridge I had marked on the map, a point that promised a clear view of the surrounding valleys. The trail was rougher than I anticipated, almost non-existent in parts, forcing me to push through brush, duck under low-hanging branches, and climb over fallen logs. By midday, I had worked my way up to the ridge. The view was incredible: rolling green slopes, valleys covered in mist, the sun breaking through in golden beams. I rested there for a while, eating a small snack and drinking water, taking careful note of landmarks for the hike back. That sense of isolation was both thrilling and unnerving. Even though the forest had been alive, it was also quiet in a way that reminded me how vulnerable I was. There was no one around for miles. No signal on my phone. No noise except what I brought or what moved naturally. The thought was exciting until it wasn't, and I reminded myself to stay alert. I started back toward my camp in the late afternoon. The forest changed tone as the sun began to set, the shadows growing longer, the underbrush dimming. On the way, I noticed tracks in the dirt. Large, four-toed imprints, deep and spaced far apart. My stomach sank. Bears were known in the area. Not the small ones that raided campsites and stole food, but large, potentially dangerous grizzlies. I paused, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, nothing made noise. I told myself it was probably old tracks, but every step afterward, I felt the weight of those prints and the potential threat they represented. I walked faster, careful not to make unnecessary noise, ears straining for any sign of movement. By the time I reached my camp, dusk was settling fully, and I lit a fire immediately. The crackling of flames felt necessary, not just for warmth but as a signal that I was here, alive, present. I checked my food, storing it safely in a backpack tied high to a tree branch, as I had read in survival guides. I ate quickly, keeping a constant eye on the woods. That night, sleep came slowly. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush made my body tense. I lay awake for hours, flashlight on the tent, scanning the edges of the clearing, telling myself it was probably nothing, yet feeling the real potential for danger pressing just beyond the firelight. On the third day, I decided to explore another direction, hoping to find a small pond marked on the map. It required crossing a denser part of the forest. The trees were closer together, the ground softer and damp with pine needles, moss, and decomposed leaves. I made good time initially, moving carefully, trying not to slip on wet roots or uneven ground. About halfway there, I heard something unusual. Low, rhythmic thumping, different from the usual forest sounds. I froze, straining to hear. It wasn't a branch falling or an animal moving casually. It was heavier, deliberate. I thought maybe someone else was in the forest, though that was unlikely, given how remote this area was. My heart rate accelerated. I looked around, trying to spot a shape or movement. Nothing. I debated turning back, but I wanted to reach the pond before nightfall. I moved cautiously, keeping aware of sounds behind and ahead. The thumping continued intermittently, always in the distance, always just at the edge of hearing. It felt wrong, as though something or someone was following a rhythm I couldn't place. That unease built steadily, a creeping, sinking tension in my stomach. Eventually, I reached the pond just as the light was fading. It was small, mostly circular, with reeds and shallow edges. Water was clear, cold, reflective. I sat down, took off my backpack, and rested. My legs were stiff, my body tense. I drank water and ate a granola bar, listening to the forest. Here, the thumping stopped. I tried to relax, scanning the water's surface, noting the reflection of trees and sky, the ripples caused by fish beneath. It felt peaceful for a moment, deceptively calm. But then I noticed something. Footprints along the wet soil of the pond's edge, fresh and human. Not small either. Big, heavy steps, irregularly spaced. My chest tightened. I had seen signs of wildlife, but human footprints this far in the forest were unusual. I examined them carefully. There were only a few, stopping abruptly at the water's edge. I could see where someone had stood and looked around, perhaps just as I was doing now. I realized, with a sudden, icy clarity, that someone had been here recently and had left no other trace than these prints. I decided to head back immediately, choosing a path slightly different from the one I came through. My pace quickened, the weight of isolation pressing down. Sunlight was fading fast, and the forest was moving toward full darkness. The thumping returned, now louder, more consistent. I realized it wasn't random. It followed me. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. Perhaps a hunter? Another camper? A lost hiker? None of these felt right. The sound came in short bursts, sometimes from the right, sometimes from the left, never a clear line, but always present. I broke into a run, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at my face. My lungs burned. Every step made a new noise, but the thumping persisted, following me through the forest. I felt exposed, like every sound I made was broadcast into the darkness. Panic rose, but I focused on controlling it. I had maps, I had my compass, I had my headlamp. If I kept moving, I could reach camp before night swallowed the path entirely. By the time I reached my clearing, the sky was fully dark. My fire had died down, leaving only a small glowing core of embers. I fumbled to relight it, shaking, my hands trembling. Every sound outside the firelight felt like someone stepping closer. I managed to get the flames burning, small but enough to give me comfort. I double-checked my food, tied it higher, checked my tent stakes, made sure nothing could easily be disturbed. Hours passed. The forest was loud with normal nighttime sounds, but the unnatural thumping had stopped. Sleep was impossible. I sat near the fire, watching the edge of the clearing, ears straining for anything abnormal. It wasn't until the sun began to rise that I finally allowed myself to lie down again, exhaustion forcing my body to shut down despite the tension in my mind. Morning brought relief, sunlight filtering through the trees, warming the clearing. I packed up, careful to leave no trace of my presence, and began the hike back to the car. Every step felt safer, though the memory of the night's fear lingered. I took extra care, making sure to note landmarks and paths. Hours later, I reached the road. The car, dusty and scratched by branches, sat waiting. I loaded everything, feeling the weight of the forest and its lessons pressing on me. The drive back was slow, cautious, but eventually, I hit pavement and then the familiar hum of traffic. I felt an almost overwhelming sense of relief, a shift from tension to normalcy. I was safe, alive, and whole. The fear of the forest, the thumping, the footprints, they had been real, threatening, but they were behind me now. I returned home, unpacked, and spent days processing the experience. I realized that fear was a useful thing in the wild, that caution and preparedness mattered far more than bravado. I had survived a night that could have gone badly, and I had respected the forest in a way I had not anticipated. The experience left a mark, not trauma, but awareness. I still think of that forest, the ridge, the pond, the hidden dangers that lurk in silence, and I carry it with me in every outdoor trip since. I never forget the thumping, the footprints, the sensation of being followed by unseen presence. But I also never forget the relief, the clarity, the beauty of the woods when approached with caution and respect. It was a scare, yes, but a survival story in the purest sense. I decided to go camping alone in the mountains for the first time. I had been hiking before and had always loved spending time in the wilderness, but this trip was different. I wanted complete isolation, no distractions, just me and the woods. I planned my route carefully, studying maps and weather reports. The forecast was clear, and the trail was rated moderate, nothing too extreme. I packed my backpack meticulously. A tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, a portable stove, a first aid kit, extra water, a flashlight with extra batteries, a compass, a map, and a small pocket knife. I wanted to be prepared for anything. I even double-checked the straps on my boots and the condition of my rain jacket. I left my car at a small parking area near the trailhead and started walking. First, the hike was peaceful. The air smelled clean and crisp. Pine trees lined the path, and the soft crunch of needles and dry leaves beneath my boots was calming. Birds sang in the distance, and every now and then, I would catch sight of squirrels or chipmunks darting between trees. I felt a sense of freedom I rarely experienced in the city. I followed the trail markers carefully, aware that a wrong turn could leave me stranded. I kept a steady pace, stopping every hour or so to drink water and rest. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing beside a narrow stream. The area looked perfect for my campsite. The ground was flat, dry, and sheltered by a ring of tall trees. I decided to set up my tent there. I carefully laid out the tent footprint, pegged it to the ground, and assembled the poles. It took longer than I expected, as I wanted everything to be secure. I tested the tent zipper multiple times to make sure it closed smoothly and checked that my sleeping bag fit comfortably inside. I stacked my backpack neatly just outside the tent and placed the food in a waterproof container. Then I collected firewood, breaking off small branches and gathering dry twigs. I found larger logs nearby, damp in some places but usable if split carefully. Once the fire pit was ready, I started a small fire with a lighter and some kindling. The flames flickered in the evening air, casting shadows on the trees. I boiled water for dinner, enjoying the simplicity of eating from a small metal pot. The warmth of the fire and the smell of cooking food made me feel at home in the wilderness, even though I was completely alone. As night approached, the temperature dropped quickly. I added more wood to the fire and carefully organized my gear inside the tent, making sure my flashlight and knife were within reach. I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the forest. At first, the noises were comforting. The rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a distant bird, the gentle trickle of the stream. But as the darkness deepened, the forest seemed to change. Sounds became sharper, more pronounced. Twigs snapped under the weight of unseen animals. Every few minutes, I heard a distant, low growl or a rustling in the bushes. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was just a deer or a raccoon. I tried to focus on the fire and my breathing, convincing myself I was safe. Around midnight, the wind picked up. The trees creaked and groaned under the pressure, and small branches fell to the ground. I felt exposed in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of an active forest. Then I heard it, a heavier, deliberate crunch of footsteps approaching from the direction of the stream. My body froze. I had no idea what was out there. I could barely see through the tent mesh, but I knew someone, or something, was moving closer. My first instinct was to stay silent. I reached for my knife, my hand shaking. The footsteps stopped suddenly, just on the edge of my firelight. I could hear breathing, uneven and heavy. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear, a mountain lion, a human. I told myself not to panic, to think clearly. I remembered reading that most predators avoid humans if they know they are noticed. So I made myself as small and still as possible, hoping to remain unseen. Then the creature moved again, circling the fire just outside the trees. The rustling and snapping branches echoed in the dark, and I realized that firelight might actually attract attention. I considered extinguishing it, but it was my only source of warmth and visibility. Minutes passed like hours. I stayed in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, listening. Eventually, the sounds moved further away. I waited another hour, too scared to move, before I finally peered out. Nothing was there. I decided to cover my head with the sleeping bag, trying to calm my nerves. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, every shadow made me tense. Morning came slowly. The sky lightened, and I could finally see the surroundings clearly. The forest looked normal again, peaceful even, but the memory of the night left a heavy weight on me. I decided to pack up immediately and continue hiking. I took down the tent, bundled the sleeping bag, and carefully stored everything in my backpack. Every step along the trail felt safer in the daylight, but I still kept my senses sharp. I hiked for several hours, following the stream downstream. I felt uneasy, constantly checking the trees and listening for movement. Around midday, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Fresh paw prints in the soft mud beside the trail. They were large, at least as big as my hand, with claw marks. I realized they must belong to a bear. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew sudden movements could trigger an attack. I retraced my steps slightly and changed my path to stay in open areas, keeping an eye out for more signs. The rest of the day was tense. I moved quickly, scanning the forest for any movement. The sun began to lower, and I knew I couldn't keep hiking all night. I found another small clearing near a rock outcrop. I set up my tent quickly and started a fire again, keeping it small. I made sure my food was hung from a nearby tree, out of reach of any animals. The rest of the evening passed in anxious vigilance. I slept lightly, if at all, waking at every rustle. The next morning, I decided I needed to get out of the forest entirely. I carefully checked my map and estimated the distance to the nearest road. I packed up and began a long hike, moving steadily. I kept my knife ready and my eyes scanning for wildlife. I spotted several deer, which were harmless, and heard distant birds, which helped me maintain some sense of normalcy. Still, the fear from the previous night lingered, making every shadow look like a threat. By mid-afternoon, I reached a ridge with a clear view of the valley below. I spotted a narrow dirt road winding through the trees. Relief flooded me. I picked up my pace, descending carefully. The trail became steeper, and I had to watch every step to avoid slipping. My legs burned with exhaustion, but the thought of leaving the forest drove me forward. Finally, I emerged from the dense woods and reached the road. I could see a car parked in the distance. I walked quickly until I reached it, feeling a sense of victory and relief. I unlocked my own car, loaded my gear, and sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, letting the adrenaline fade. I was safe. The experience had been terrifying, but I had survived by staying alert, calm, and cautious. On the drive home, I reflected on what had happened. Camping alone in the wilderness was exhilarating, but it was also dangerous. I realized I had underestimated the risks of isolation and wildlife encounters. From that day on, I made a rule. I would never camp alone without letting someone know my exact location, and I would always carry bear spray and other protective measures. The memory of the night still haunted me, but it also taught me to respect nature and the dangers it held. I decided to go camping alone in a remote forest area because I wanted quiet and space away from people. I felt tired of noise, tired of the city, tired of screens and traffic and crowded places. I wanted to hear wind in the trees and the sound of water moving over rocks. I wanted to feel like I was far from everything. I packed food, water, extra clothes, a sleeping bag, a small tent, a knife, a flashlight, and a first aid kit. I checked maps over and over again and marked the trail and the place I planned to camp. The plan looked simple. Hike most of the day, set up camp near a small stream, stay one night, and hike back the next morning. The air felt warm when I started walking, and the sun was bright through the trees. The trail began wide and clear, but the deeper I went, the narrower it became. I looked around and noticed how quiet the forest felt compared to the city. The smell of damp soil and pine needles followed me while I walked. The only sounds were birds, insects, and the steady crunch of dirt and twigs under my boots. At first I felt calm, almost peaceful, like I had made a good decision coming here. Hours passed. I moved farther away from anything familiar. I kept checking my map and compass to be sure I was on track. I wanted to reach the small valley near the stream before evening so I could set up camp with enough light left in the sky. The deeper I went, the more isolated the place felt. The trail looked like it had not been used very often. Fallen branches lay across parts of it, and some areas were overgrown with tall grass and bushes, like nature had started taking the trail back. I carried my backpack and felt the weight pressing down on my shoulders. Sweat gathered on my back and under my arms. My legs burned from climbing small hills. I could feel every rock under my boots, and every step seemed louder as the forest around me grew thicker. I kept reminding myself that this was what I wanted, that I came here for quiet. But the quiet slowly began to feel different. Not peaceful anymore, just heavy and empty. When I finally reached the small valley, the stream ran slowly across smooth stones. The water was cold and clear, and I could see tiny fish moving near the bottom. I chose a flat patch of ground near a group of tall trees and started to set up my tent. I drove the stakes into the dirt, unrolled my sleeping bag, and made a small fire ring out of stones. I ate some food while sitting on a fallen log. The sky slowly changed color as evening came, turning soft orange and then darker blue. As the sun dropped lower, I started feeling something different inside me. It was small at first, just a light sense of unease. I could not explain it. The forest did not feel the same as it had earlier in the day. The shadows grew longer, and shapes began to blend together. The trees looked taller and closer, like they were pressing in toward my camp. The air cooled fast, and a faint wind slid through the branches, carrying dry leaves across the ground. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself this was normal, that being alone in a place like this would naturally feel strange at night. I added more wood to the fire and watched the flames rise and fall. The sound of the stream mixed with the crackling of burning wood. Even with the fire, the darkness beyond it felt thick, like a wall. The light only reached a small circle around me, and everything outside that circle became nothing but black shapes and deep shadows. As night settled in, I noticed sounds I had not heard before. Sharp snapping noises from branches, soft movement through dry leaves, something heavy brushing past bushes. Each sound came from a different direction. None of it sounded like wind. The movement felt slow and careful, like something was out there but did not want to be seen. I sat still and listened, my body tense, my breathing slow and shallow. My heart began to beat harder, and I could feel it in my throat and chest. I looked into the dark, but I could not see anything beyond the firelight. My flashlight was inside the tent, and for a long moment I did not want to stand up to get it. I felt exposed. I felt like if I moved, something might react. The sounds came again, slightly closer. Leaves shifted. A branch snapped. Something stepped on the ground with weight, not like a small animal but something heavier, larger, deliberate. I tried to calm myself and think clearly. I knew large animals lived in forests like this. Deer, wild boar, maybe even a stray dog or some other roaming animal. I tried to tell myself it was normal, but the sounds did not move away. They circled slowly, first on one side of the trees, then on another. Long pauses, then more movement. I could almost feel the presence of something just outside the light, something watching me. I felt small and weak in that circle of firelight, alone with miles of black forest in every direction. The longer I sat there, the stronger the fear grew. It did not come fast. It crawled in slowly and settled deep in my body, like cold water filling my chest. I finally forced myself to stand and reach into the tent for my flashlight. My hands shook as I grabbed it. I turned it on and pointed it toward the trees. The beam of light cut through the dark and shook across trunks, bushes, and the uneven forest floor. For a few seconds I saw nothing but empty space and rough bark. Then I saw large marks in the dirt near the tree line, fresh and deep. They looked like tracks left by something strong and heavy. I stepped closer and lowered the light. The tracks were large and spread apart, leading in a wide curve around my camp. The soil still looked disturbed, like the prints had been made not long ago. I followed them with the light and saw more crushed grass, broken twigs, and scraped bark on one of the trees. I felt my stomach tighten. My mind ran through possibilities. A large wild animal, maybe a bear passing through, maybe a large boar. The idea made sense, but the fear stayed strong because it felt like whatever it was had not passed through. It felt like it was staying nearby. I backed slowly toward the fire, but I kept the flashlight pointed toward the trees. The night felt quieter than before, but not in a peaceful way. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, like everything around me was waiting. I sat again near the fire and tried to eat more food, but I could barely swallow. My mouth felt dry, and I could taste metal in the back of my throat from fear and tension. Hours passed very slowly. The fire burned lower. The darkness grew heavier. Every sound felt louder. The stream no longer sounded calm. It sounded distant and cold. I forced myself to keep adding wood to the fire, because the thought of sitting there with no light terrified me. I knew the fire might help keep animals away, but I also knew it made me visible from far away. I felt exposed on all sides. At some point deep in the night, I heard a new sound. Not movement through leaves, but a low, steady breathing sound coming from the darkness beyond the stream. It was faint but real. Long, slow breaths, the kind made by something alive and large. I froze, muscles locked tight, my skin cold even though the fire warmed my face. My heart hammered so hard I felt dizzy. The breathing continued for a while, then stopped. After that came silence again, thick and heavy. I did not sleep. I did not even lie down. I stayed awake, sitting near the fire, watching the dark until the sky began to slowly lighten. When the first weak blue light appeared through the trees, I felt a small sense of relief. The shapes around me became real again. The trees lost their threatening shadows and turned back into just trees. When morning finally came, I walked around my campsite in the daylight. The ground near the trees and bushes showed more tracks, more disturbed soil, and areas where something had clearly stood for a long time. Some parts of the ground were pressed deep, like heavy weight had rested there. The prints circled my camp in different spots. I followed a trail of crushed grass farther into the trees and saw broken branches higher up, as if something tall had pushed through. Seeing those signs in daylight made everything feel worse. At night I could still doubt, still think fear made things seem bigger than they were. But in daylight, the damage on the ground was clear and real. Something large had walked around my camp, again and again, slowly and silently, while I sat there awake and scared. It had stayed close through most of the night. I decided to pack my things and leave right away. I wanted to get back to the trail and return to the car as fast as I could while still staying careful. I rolled up my sleeping bag, took down the tent, and packed everything with shaky hands. I kept looking around while I worked. The forest now felt open, but every tree made me uneasy. Every shadow made me think something was standing there watching me. I started hiking back the way I came. The trail that had felt peaceful on the way in now felt long and hostile. I looked behind me over and over again. I watched the trees for movement. I listened for footsteps, for branches snapping, for breathing. For a while, the only things I heard were my own footsteps and my own breathing. I walked faster than I had planned, my legs tired but my fear pushing me forward. After a few miles, I stopped to rest near a fallen log. I took off my backpack and drank water. My shoulders ached and my legs felt weak. While I stood there, I noticed something in the dirt near the side of the trail. More large tracks, the same shape and size as the ones near my camp. The soil was soft, and the edges of the prints looked fresh. Dirt still crumbled inward from the sides like they were new. They pointed in the same direction I was walking. My chest tightened again. It meant whatever had walked around my camp had also moved along the trail at some point. I did not know if it was ahead of me or behind me, but I knew it had traveled this same path. I looked around slowly, eyes scanning every gap between trees, every bush, every dark spot under branches. The forest was silent in a strange way. No birds, no insects, just stillness. I started walking again, this time even faster, almost pushing my legs past what felt comfortable. I could feel fear sitting deep in my stomach like a heavy stone. I tried to breathe slowly to keep from panicking. My backpack bounced slightly with each step, and the straps cut into my shoulders. Sweat ran down my back even though the air felt cool. After some time, I began to feel like I was being followed. It was not because I heard anything at first. It was just a feeling that grew stronger the longer I walked. The sense that something was behind me, not close but not far either. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it again. A faint sound of something moving through leaves and brush, matching my pace, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. I did not turn around right away. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, trying to think. I told myself to stay focused on the trail and not run, because running might make things worse. The sound came again, a slow, heavy step, then another, then silence. I finally stopped and turned slowly, lifting my flashlight even though it was daylight, using it to point through darker shadows. I saw nothing at first, just trees, bushes, and rough ground. But the feeling stayed. The forest behind me looked normal, but it did not feel normal. I could imagine something standing just out of sight, watching me, waiting. I turned back to the trail and continued walking, but now every step felt tense. I could not relax. The sense of being watched followed me like a shadow that would not leave. The trail led me up a small hill with loose rocks and dry soil. My boots slipped a little as I climbed. When I reached the top, I stopped to rest for a second and looked down toward the area I had just walked through. There, in the softer dirt near the base of the hill, I saw fresh tracks again. They pointed upward, toward the hill, toward me. The sight made my heart drop. I realized then that whatever was out there was not just passing through the forest. It was moving in the same direction as me, step by step, mile by mile. It had circled my camp during the night, stayed close, and now it was still there in daylight, somewhere in the trees, matching my path. Felt intentional, not random. Not like an animal wandering, but like something following. I forced myself to keep going. The sun moved higher in the sky, but the deeper I walked toward the thicker part of the trail, the darker the forest felt. The trees grew closer together. The air felt trapped and heavy. When wind passed through the branches, it made a low, hollow sound that reminded me of distant breathing again. I did not stop to rest anymore. I just walked and walked, my legs aching, my shoulders burning, but fear pushing me forward. At one point, I heard a sudden loud crack from deep in the trees behind me, like a thick branch snapping under heavy weight. The sound was sharp and real, not imagined, not mistaken. I did not turn around. I just kept walking faster, almost to the point of running, but still trying to keep some control so I would not fall or twist my ankle. My heart pounded harder than it had all night, and my throat felt tight, like air could barely pass through. The trail finally started to widen and show signs of use again. I recognized some rocks and tree shapes from my hike in. I knew I was getting closer to the trailhead and the place where my car was parked. The thought of reaching it felt like the only thing keeping me moving. My legs shook with every step, and my backpack felt heavier than it had at the start. The sounds behind me slowly faded. Either whatever was following had stopped, or I was too far ahead now. But the feeling of being watched stayed. Even when I reached the final stretch of open trail near the edge of the forest, I still felt eyes on my back, like something stood in the shadows just inside the tree line, hidden and silent, watching me leave. When I finally saw my car in the small dirt parking area, I felt my body almost collapse with relief. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and dropped my backpack inside. I turned once more toward the forest. The trees stood still and quiet in the distance, dark and tall, hiding everything inside them. I could not see anything there, but the feeling did not go away. I still felt watched. I still felt like something stood just inside the shadows, silent and patient. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment before starting the engine. My heart still raced, and my breathing came slow and uneven. My clothes were damp with sweat, and my muscles ached from fear and exhaustion. I finally drove away, watching the forest shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. Even after I left, the fear did not fade. When I got home and tried to rest, I kept thinking about the tracks, the broken branches, the slow movement around my camp in the middle of the night, the breathing in the darkness, and the way the sounds followed me along the trail. I kept thinking about how whatever it was never rushed at me, never charged, never attacked. It just stayed close, quiet, deliberate, circling, following, watching. Not curious, not confused, just present. Always there. The ending is clear in my mind now. I understood that I was never really alone during that trip. From the time night fell at my campsite to the moment I reached my car, something large and real moved through the forest with me. It stayed hidden but close, always just beyond my sight, always near enough to remind me how small and powerless I was out there. It did not need to touch me or harm me to scare me. The danger was in knowing it was there the whole time, choosing to stay near me, choosing to follow me through the dark and into the morning, and letting me leave only because it decided not to do anything more. That knowledge stays with me now. I learned that the scariest part of the wilderness is not what you imagine. It is what is real, silent, patient, and close enough to watch you without you seeing it, close enough to circle your camp in the dark, close enough to follow your footsteps for miles, and close enough to remind you that once you step deep into a place like that, you are never as alone or as safe as you think you are. I had been planning the trip for months. I wanted a break from everything, a real escape. My work had been piling up, and every day felt like I was running in circles. I wanted silence, open air, and the chance to feel small in the middle of nature. I packed my car with everything I thought I would need: a tent, Sleeping bag, stove, water, enough food for a few days, extra batteries, a first aid kit, a map, a compass, a small axe, and a flashlight with backup bulbs. I left early in the morning, the sun barely above the horizon, and drove for hours until the city and its noise faded completely behind me. The road narrowed, and soon it became a gravel trail winding through thick forest. The trees leaned toward the road, their branches brushing the sides of my car. Birds were quiet. I saw only a few small animals darting into the undergrowth. I found a small clearing marked on the map as a campsite. It was perfect, flat, dry, surrounded by dense forest but open enough to see a little sky. I unloaded my gear, set up the tent, and stacked some firewood I found nearby. I was alone, and the silence felt both calming and heavy, like the forest was holding its breath, watching me. The first night was peaceful. I lit a small fire, cooked a simple meal, and watched the flames dance. The sounds of the forest at night were strange but soothing. The wind whispering through the leaves, distant calls of owls, the crackle of dry branches under the weight of small animals moving around. I went to sleep feeling tired but content, confident in my preparation. The next day, I decided to explore the surrounding area. I followed a trail along a shallow stream that cut through the forest. The water was clear, moving quickly over rocks and fallen branches. I filled my water bottle and marked my path with small rock stacks in case I needed to find my way back. I walked further than I planned, losing track of time, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and unease. The forest felt alive in a way that wasn't entirely comforting. Shadows shifted even in the sun, and I constantly felt like I was being watched. By the afternoon, I realized I had wandered farther than I intended. My sense of direction wasn't perfect, and while I could retrace the stream for a bit, the forest seemed to grow denser, the trees closer together. I decided to turn back. On the way, I noticed something odd: broken branches and footprints in the mud. They were large, irregular, and I couldn't immediately recognize what kind of animal they belonged to. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Bears were common in the area, but I had food locked in bear-proof containers, and I carried bear spray. Still, the idea of an unknown animal moving nearby made the hair on my arms stand on end. When I returned to my campsite, I noticed the fire I had left dying had gone out. No problem, I was prepared. I gathered some wood, started the fire again, and decided to stay close to it. Darkness fell quickly. I ate, cleaned up, and settled into my tent, flashlight within reach. Around midnight, I was woken by a rustling sound. At first, I thought it was the wind or a small animal, but the sound was deliberate, moving closer to my tent in slow steps. My stomach tightened. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it toward the noise. Nothing. Silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath again. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, and after a few tense minutes, I managed to calm myself and return to sleep, but lightly, every sound making me tense. The next morning, I saw the damage. My firewood was scattered, a few of my food wrappers torn open, and deep scratches on a tree near my tent. Whatever had been moving around my campsite wasn't small. My heart sank as I realized how vulnerable I had been. I spent the morning securing everything and preparing to leave, but I also knew I wanted one last hike along a ridge I had spotted earlier. The ridge overlooked a valley and promised a view I had been excited about. I packed lightly water, some snacks, my compass, and my map. I reached the base of the ridge after a steep climb. The trail was narrow, winding along loose rocks and roots, and the forest below was dense, almost a green sea with dark shadows moving through it. I reached a clearing near the top and stopped to breathe. That's when I heard it, the low growl. Not a bear roar, not a wolf howl, something low and guttural, almost human but not. My pulse spiked. I froze, scanning the forest below. A large shape moved between the trees, staying just at the edge of visibility. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it was big. Too big for a deer, too low and bulky for a bear, maybe. But I had no choice but to stay calm. Panic could be fatal on a narrow ridge like this. I took a deep breath and slowly started to backtrack, keeping my eyes on the shape. The growl came again, closer this time, and then the sound of heavy footsteps scrambling over loose branches. I knew I couldn't outrun something this fast in this terrain, so I moved carefully, placing each foot deliberately, trying to make no sudden movements. By the time I reached the lower trees, I saw it clearly. A large adult male bear, black but with an unusual bulk that made it seem almost oversized. Its eyes were fixed on me, and my stomach knotted. I had never been so aware of every breath I took, every sound of my own movements. I remembered everything I had read. Don't run, make yourself big, back away slowly. I raised my arms, spoke in low tones, but didn't move too quickly. The bear took a step forward, sniffing the air. I froze. One wrong move, one sudden motion, and it could charge. It was terrifyingly close, but somehow, maybe because of my slow, deliberate movements, it didn't attack. I backed toward a tree, keeping my eye on it. After what felt like an eternity, it lost interest and lumbered off into the forest, leaving me shaking, heart racing, feeling like I had cheated death. I realized then how unprepared I had been. All the planning in the world didn't matter if you didn't account for the real dangers of wilderness. I decided it was time to leave immediately. I packed everything quickly, double-checking that all food and trash was secured. I kept my bear spray in hand as I walked down the trail, staying alert, listening to every sound. The forest felt different now. Alive, aware, and completely unpredictable. Shadows seemed larger, the rustle of leaves sharper, the wind through the trees like a whisper. I moved quickly but cautiously, never leaving my guard down. By late afternoon, I reached the car, and as I collapsed into the driver's seat, relief washed over me. The engine roared to life, and I drove slowly, carefully, constantly checking the sides of the road. The forest receded behind me, but the tension lingered. I realized that camping alone in a remote area meant facing things you might never see in the city, things you couldn't easily prepare for. And yet, the experience had been transformative. I had seen how fragile human life could be in comparison to the wilderness, how careful planning could save you, and how instincts mattered as much as gear. I stopped at the first town on the outskirts of the forest. I bought supplies, fuel, and food, but I also bought something more important: perspective. That night, in the safety of a motel, I unpacked my gear, checked every item, and promised myself that my next trip would be smarter. I had learned that fear wasn't just a story. It was real. It could strike at any moment, and it demanded respect. I slept poorly that night, reliving every sound, every rustle, every growl, but I also felt alive in a way I hadn't before. The next morning, I drove home. The forest was behind me, but the lesson stayed with me. Every trip afterward, I planned with even more care, always alert, always aware of what could happen. I realized that nature wasn't forgiving, but it also gave perspective, taught patience, awareness, and the value of being prepared. And even though I had been terrified, I also felt gratitude for life, for safety, and for the quiet lessons that only wilderness could teach. I had planned this trip for months. It was supposed to be simple, just me, a tent, a small backpack, and the woods. I wanted to get away from everything. The city, the noise, the constant pressure of work and people. I didn't want anyone around. My plan was to hike a few miles in, find a good spot near a small creek I had read about on a map, set up camp, and spend a couple of nights alone. I told myself I could handle it. I told myself I was prepared. I thought I had done enough research. I thought I knew what I was doing. I started early in the morning, carrying a backpack that was heavier than I expected. I had packed the essentials: a tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, a couple of cans of food, some trail bars, water bottles, a first aid kit, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I didn't bring a satellite phone, just my regular cell, knowing that reception would likely vanish once I got deep into the forest. I didn't need anyone to call me. I wanted this to be entirely on my own. The hike began well. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird and the rustle of leaves underfoot. The path was overgrown in some areas, but nothing I couldn't handle. I carried my backpack, stepping over roots and rocks, following the map closely. The sun was high in the sky, bright but filtered through thick trees. Every now and then, I would stop to take a sip of water or glance at the map to make sure I hadn't wandered off the trail. After several hours, I found the creek I had been looking for. It wasn't large, just a thin stream cutting through the forest, but it was enough for water and, more importantly, it made a decent spot for a campsite. I chose a relatively flat clearing a few feet from the creek, surrounded by tall pine trees. The ground was soft with fallen needles, and there were a few large rocks I could use to sit on. I set my backpack down and started assembling my tent, struggling a bit with the stakes on uneven ground, but eventually getting it upright. I unrolled my sleeping bag inside and arranged my supplies neatly. I was proud of myself. For a moment, I felt a calm sense of achievement. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering firewood. I found dry sticks and small logs scattered around, careful to avoid the damp pieces that would smolder instead of burn. The sound of the creek running nearby was soothing. I had packed a small portable stove for cooking, but I wanted the fire both for warmth and for comfort. It made the space feel safer. I stacked the firewood in a neat pile and went to explore the area a little. The forest around me was dense, full of undergrowth and shadows, but I kept to well-trodden paths. I made mental notes of the landmarks so I could find my way back to the campsite if I wandered. As the day wore on, the sun began to sink lower. The forest changed. The shadows grew longer, and the sounds shifted. Birds quieted down, and a wind rustled through the trees. I set up the fire, struck a match, and was relieved when it caught immediately. The crackle of the flames felt comforting, like a barrier against the unknown. I cooked a simple meal, canned beans heated over the fire, and ate slowly, enjoying the solitude. But as the sun dipped completely behind the trees, a different kind of quiet settled over the forest. The shadows deepened, stretching in ways that made familiar shapes seem strange. I cleaned up my cooking area, packed away leftover food, and crawled into my sleeping bag inside the tent. The darkness pressed against the thin fabric, and the occasional sound from outside made me tense. The wind whispered through the branches, and I imagined all sorts of things moving just beyond my sight. I told myself to relax, that everything was normal. I had been alone in the woods before, even for long periods, and nothing bad had ever happened. But that night felt different. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of something moving outside. At first, I thought it was the wind or a branch falling, but the noise was deliberate, consistent. A series of cracks and snaps that suggested someone or something was walking through the underbrush. My heart started to race. I listened closely, trying to make sense of the sound. It was coming from the direction of the creek, circling the campsite slowly. I froze, considering my options. I could stay in the tent and hope it was an animal, or I could grab my flashlight and investigate. I didn't have a weapon beyond a small multi-tool, but I kept it close anyway. I tried to remember everything I had read about wildlife. How bears move, how coyotes move, and the sounds they make. But these noises didn't match anything I had heard in videos or guides. They were heavier, more deliberate, and unnervingly close. The sound paused. I held my breath, listening to my own heartbeat. Then, a low, grating noise started, almost like someone dragging something heavy through the forest. It moved closer, circling my tent. Panic settled in my chest. My rational mind told me it could be a bear, but the sound was too calculated. A bear doesn't usually circle its prey like this. It moves, sniffs, and then attacks if it feels threatened. This was different. I unzipped the tent just a little, enough to shine my flashlight outside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the nearest trees and part of the creek. Nothing moved in the light, but I could see broken twigs and disturbed leaves, evidence that something had definitely passed there. I kept the light on, scanning slowly, but the deeper shadows were impenetrable. The movement had stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I considered packing up and leaving immediately, but my backpack was heavy, and moving quietly through the dark woods was risky. Hours passed with intermittent sounds. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, made me flinch. Sleep was impossible. I stayed inside the tent, flashlight on intermittently, listening. Dawn finally approached, light creeping through the trees. The sounds ceased as the forest came alive again with birdsong. I waited until the sun was fully up before leaving the tent. Outside, I inspected the area. Footprints, not animal tracks, human. Someone had walked around my campsite during the night. The prints were large, and they circled the tent, coming from the creek and then disappearing back into the forest. My stomach sank. I realized that someone had been near me, watching, waiting, and I had no way of knowing if they were still around. I packed up quickly, deciding I couldn't stay another night. I tried to stay calm, but I was hyper-aware of every sound. I moved quietly, taking the same path I had come from. The forest seemed different now, menacing in its familiarity. I kept my eyes on the path, my ears straining for any unusual sounds. Every shadow looked like someone hiding. Every rustle made my heart leap. A few miles in, I reached a ridge that gave me a view of the trail ahead. I thought I saw movement, but when I blinked, it was gone. The feeling of being followed stayed with me the entire hike. I kept reminding myself to stay rational, that I wasn't imagining things, but I couldn't shake the unease. Eventually, after hours of tense hiking, I reached the main road where I had parked my car. Relief washed over me. I glanced back at the forest one last time. The place that had been so peaceful just a day ago, now filled with uncertainty and fear. I locked the car doors, started the engine, and drove away slowly, keeping an eye on the edges of the forest as I went. Once I was back in town, the normal sights and sounds of people and traffic were almost overwhelming. The sense of isolation, of being watched, lingered for days, but I knew I had made the right choice. I had survived unharmed, and I had proof that the world could be unpredictable, even in places I thought were safe. I never returned to that spot. I never took another solo camping trip in that area. But I learned a lot from it. Preparation matters, awareness matters, and sometimes the forest holds more than wildlife. It holds people you never expect. I told myself I would never underestimate that again. The memory of the circling footsteps, the low scraping sound, and the footprints outside my tent stayed with me. A clear lesson that the world is often more dangerous than it seems, even when it looks calm and beautiful. I eventually returned to camping, but always with company, always with a plan for communication, always aware that no matter how prepared you are, there are unknowns you cannot control. I learned to respect not only the forest but also the fact that humans, not just animals, can pose a threat in the most unexpected places. That knowledge stayed with me far longer than the fear. It stayed as a sharp awareness that kept me alive, kept me cautious, and kept me making careful choices.